Welcome once again to the Mindset Masterclass channel, the online home of quality content relating to personal finance, entrepreneurship, and investing. Let me ask, what does a billionaire look like to you? Which billionaires spring to mind? Chances are you think of the super rich entrepreneurs we hear about regularly in the media. The billionaires that have become household names are often in the media spotlight for one reason or another. Perhaps you thought of Amazon founder Jeff Bezos, investing mogul Warren Buffett, Facebook CEO Mark Zuckerberg, or Tesla boss Elon Musk. These well-known entrepreneurs certainly are rich, but I bet they're not really as wealthy as you think they are. Let me explain. When we think of high-profile business leaders like Bezos, Zuckerberg, or Musk, we think of them as having vast amounts of cash tucked away, perhaps in bank vaults or treasure chests. In reality, their wealth is only on paper. That is, the supposed net worth of an individual touted by publications like Forbes magazine might take into account the number of shares that individual is known to own in their companies. This information is publicly available if you know where to look. The figure quoted as being the person's fortune assumes that every asset held by the individual could be traded right now for that amount of money. At the time of writing, Bezos owns 51.7 million shares in Amazon stock. Today, those shares are changing hands at about $3,500 apiece. In theory, that would mean that Bezos' stake in Amazon is worth just shy of $181 billion. However, in reality, this simple calculation of wealth is misleading. There are two things to be said here. Number one, it's likely that a CEO or major shareholder would rather not sell their controlling stake in a business because they might value it higher themselves. Many entrepreneurs have such belief and conviction in their firm's potential that they wouldn't dream of selling their stake because this would mean they lose control of the company. They would be focused on the long-term growth of the business and likely wouldn't want to miss out on capital growth. Should a major shareholder choose to sell their stake, this could be seen as a sign of lack of faith in the company and trigger a mass sell-off of the firm's shares. This would be bad because it would mean the business would struggle to raise capital in the future due to decreased faith in the business's value. Number two, it's unlikely that there would be demand in the market for so many shares at one time. After all, a stock's quoted share price is simply a reflection of the price the last stock was sold for. It does not mean that someone wishing to sell their shares could easily do so at that price. It's one thing selling a fractional share of a massive company like Amazon on your favorite brokerage app, but it's another thing to sell hundreds or thousands of them in one go. When so many shares are presented to the stock market in one go, supply is likely to outstrip demand, meaning that many shares will go unsold, thus leading to a drop in the market price. So someone like Bezos might be able to shift a handful of shares for today's quoted share price, but should he wish to sell his entire holding, he's likely to get far less for them than the figure quoted by Forbes. This concept is further illustrated in the fact that a company's value is subjective. How one person values an item might differ entirely from how another values it. For example, someone stranded in the desert might value a gallon of water much more highly than someone who lives by a lake. One investor might see great potential in Amazon stock. In their opinion, the company's profits are likely to increase significantly over the next few years after some relevant piece of news has emerged. However, another investor might have read an article suggesting that Amazon is likely to struggle in the upcoming period. Economists know that there is no such thing as perfect information. This means that in the real world, people have different knowledge and information available to them, and therefore each person's choice is informed by different variables. Bringing it back to our Amazon example, while one investor may have read a positive article about the company and be willing to pay $3,500 a share, another investor might have read a negative article and only be prepared to pay $2,750. The point I'm trying to make here is that people will have different perceptions on the value of a stock, and should so many shares be presented to the market at once, there would not necessarily be enough buyers to meet the supply, and therefore the cost per share would fall to meet what investors are willing to pay. Furthermore, should a major shareholder want to liquidate their holding, they may have to sell their shares for below the quoted price in order to clear them quickly. So for example, an Amazon share might be quoted at $3,500, but in reality such a large quantity might only sell for $3,000 per piece, or even less. The problem with the net worth figures reported by publications like Forbes is that it assumes that the person could liquidate their assets that moment for that amount of money, but in reality they're likely to struggle to do so. After all, who in the world has the funds available to buy Bezos's $181 billion stake in Amazon? The misleading nature of on-paper wealth is not limited to those who own vast amounts of company stock. There is also the phenomenon of real estate investors who may boast being worth so many $1 million, but in reality so many of them in fact owe substantial amounts to banks and other investors. This is because they have funded their investments through leverage. Simply, this means they have borrowed a chunk of the purchase price of their properties. The advantage of using leverage to purchase property is that you can control multiple assets with only a fraction of their upfront purchase price. You could, for example, on paper own 4 investment properties worth $250,000 each, meaning that you have a $1 million portfolio. However, if you only put down $50,000 on each and borrowed the rest through mortgages, then in reality you have a net worth of $200,000, a far cry from the $1 million portfolio value you've been boasting about to your friends. The advantage of using leverage to purchase real estate, however, is that you benefit from any capital appreciation in the property. Should a $250,000 house rise in value to $300,000, you would have an additional $50,000 in equity which you don't need to share with the bank. Conversely, if there is a dip in the market and house prices fall, you may be left in a position of negative equity, whereby the value of the house is worth less than the amount it was mortgaged for. In this situation, the borrower may have liability to pay $200,000 on a mortgaged property which is now worth, say, $175,000. You will still owe the $200,000 even if you sold the house for the lower amount. Therefore, a real estate investor may boast about having a $1 billion portfolio, but in reality they may have only invested about $200 million themselves and borrowed the rest. Should there be a recession, as often happens due to the cyclical nature of the economy, that $1 billion figure will soon start to fall. In reality, a person's true financial value can only be determined by how much money they are able to raise should they decide to sell all their assets at a given moment. An investor might have a $1 billion portfolio, but in reality, if they were to sell all their stocks, bonds, real estate and business interests, then pay off what they owe to their creditors, the amount left over is likely to be much lower. We can also further analyse a person's true wealth when we look at assets that are not financial. Wealth is more than just digits in a bank account or the number on an investment portfolio. Health, happiness, legacy, family, quality of life, access to education, justice, purpose, agency. These are all assets which we often overlook when we think of wealth. A high net worth individual may own an enviable portfolio, but does that mean they are truly happy? Not necessarily. It's one thing owning a lot of valuable commodities, but having the time and freedom to live your life how you choose is another thing altogether. Let me summarize with the following quote for you to consider. Rich people can buy expensive things. Wealthy people have the time to enjoy them. If you've enjoyed this video, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of our upcoming content.